the Congress and then ultimately the mainstream media are pumping out lies, saying that this is over. And unfortunately, Donald Trump, who has no depth of understanding whatsoever in these areas, certainly no strategic understanding, is inclined to believe what he hears.
So recently, Douglas Macgregor was on Daniel Davis's podcast talking a little bit about how he believes that this war between Israel and Iran, supported by the U.S. on the Israel side, is going, and why he believes that Trump has chosen the wrong path. So let's watch, let's react. Please like the video and subscribe to the channel.
He doesn't know. So if the same group of four stars that told us 3-4 years ago Russia was doomed, Ukraine would win, are all telling him now Israel is going to dominate everything, Israel's going to win, we can go in and deliver the coup de grace in one big massive strike, we can turn this whole thing around and Iran will surrender. And he's believing it.
Well, and in fact, here's a great example that I could show you the comment from Lindsey Graham yesterday where he's saying, listen, it's regime change on. Let's go in and knock them out and be done with this once and for all. And then Jack Keane talked about the mechanics of how to do it.
Yeah, Tom Tillis actually promoted regime change too, just openly when questioned about this. This has always been about regime change. It's what Netanyahu's always wanted. He said he wants the Libya model to apply there, and it's, you know, I'm right with Macgregor on this one.
My judgment, assist the Israelis in their air campaign by conducting a limited but focused air campaign on using penetration bombing to eliminate the end of that nuclear end state. And that will be a major strategic achievement. That takes off the table. Think of what it does. Takes off the table the thought of a nuclear arms race in the Middle East. It reduces Iran's as a major power broker in the region. Yeah. And for the congressman to say that we've never been at war with Iran, formally, yeah, but they killed 241 Marines in the 80s. They blew up 2 of our embassies in Lebanon and Kuwait and killed hundreds more. They killed scores of our Air Force personnel in the barracks in Saudi Arabia in the 90s, and it's a documented fact that they developed advanced IEDs to focus on U.S. soldiers in the war in Iraq.
Yeah, he just goes through this whole litany of alleged offenses by Iran against us, like why haven't we killed them earlier? But anyway.
Yeah, we only replaced their government, we being our criminal government, replaced theirs in 1953. It shot down a commercial airliner in, I believe, 89, Iran Flight 655, you can Google that. It funded a proxy war, shoveling funding to Iraq so that Iraq invaded Iran and had a war there that was bloody for many years. So yeah, there's no reason that they wanted to retaliate. It's just so absurd. There's no reason for the U.S. to intervene there. Iran hasn't tried to touch the U.S. in years and years and years, and they don't want to. Why? Because it would spell their doom if they did.
Let's go get them right now. But let's start at the first part of what he said there about this limited, targeted airstrikes, and bam, problem's going to be over. Militarily, is he right?
No, Iran is at war. This is not limited anymore in any way. Iran is going to do everything in its power to win this war. For Iran, winning the war means destroying Israel. It has to, because if it doesn't, Israel will continue to make every effort to destroy Iran. So the Iranians have to utterly and completely devastate and flatten Israel. So this is a war. This is not a limited anything. He needs to dump that word limited. And if we enter it, we too will become the target for Iran. And Iran military power will be used against us in whatever way possible.
Yeah, this is totally true. There's lots of U.S. troops in that region along the Suez Canal that is within striking distance of Iran, and Iran has much more technically advanced weaponry than any of the other Middle Eastern regimes that the U.S. has overthrown or participated in the overthrow. You know, I think it's pretty telling that the big propaganda campaign is about Iran's nuclear weapons program, which doesn't exist. Tulsi Gabbard said there's no evidence they have one, or that they've even restarted their nuclear weapons program since 2003. And by the way, she's not alone. MI6 and Mossad agree with that generally. So it's just absurd. And I think it's pretty telling that the first strike Israel made was on this residential compound where, some of the top Iranian brass was living, and that killed civilians. They didn't strike at a nuclear enrichment facility that was out in the middle of nowhere, but they can pinpoint and bomb those buildings. This was a decapitation designed to precipitate regime change. It's always been about regime change. I'm with Macgregor here, and frankly, if I think U.S. troops are hit, it's not going to be by Iran, because Iran knows that means that the U.S. is going in full bore if they do that. So I worry about a false flag attacking U.S. forces in that region for sure.
And if anybody's in any doubt about that, that was also removed earlier today when the Iranian ambassador added this.
Remarks made by Donald Trump are completely unwarranted, are very hostile. We cannot ignore them. We are vigilant about what Donald Trump is saying. We will put it in our calculations, in our assessments, and there is a line which, if crossed, there should be a response on our side. And that line will be defined by our relevant authorities, including military forces. And once the red line is crossed, the response will come.
The response will come. Now, I've heard from a couple of different sources just within the last hour that apparently a decision has been made in the White House and that strikes could be coming from the United States offensively against Iran, possibly even by this afternoon. In the event that happens, do you think that that's just bluster? Will Iran actually take American forces under fire?
I think the Iranians will target everything that they can reach with their missile arsenal. Beyond that, with their drones. Will they be able to harm us here at home? I suspect so. But remember that the first damage that Americans will feel, and this is critical, because in all of the previous operations that we've conducted since 1990, there was no real sense of pain here at home. But the Americans will feel the economic impact. And that's going to come as a result of the disruption of the oil flow and other things, along with natural gas and the markets. And we're already very fragile financially. We've been printing money as though it doesn't matter, and it's about to catch up with us in a dramatic way. Our treasury market is going to implode. We can't sell any more debt anyhow. So the bottom line is we're going to feel the pain at home this time around in ways that we never felt before. That's going to sour the American people pretty quickly on everything that everyone is discussing in Washington.
Yeah, I think I generally agree. I don't agree if the implication is that the U.S. or that Iran is going to strike U.S. forces before the U.S. strikes Iran forces. I think that the U.S. clearly, if there is an actual direct bombing by the U.S., it will happen first before Iranians retaliate. Because, again, if Iran hits the United States, that will be exploited to the maximal political gain by those that want this regime change, which there are plenty of them in Washington, not only on the left side of the aisle, but also on the right side of the aisle. Liberals and conservatives, some of them talk about it openly. Right now the Democrats kind of want to stick it to Trump, but it's not like they can really stop him because the precedents are that, the Congress just allows the president to get away with ordering his own military strikes. They don't support the Constitution. They don't recognize that in Article 1, Section 8, it says that only Congress can declare war. That's why I support Defend the Guard, so that they can't exploit state militia for these purposes when there's undeclared wars. So, yeah, this is boding very poorly. I really hope that the U.S. does not get totally sucked in, and they already are sucked in. Don't get me wrong. Trump has chosen a poor path by, it seems like, at least contributing to the sabotage of these negotiations with Iran, from going from a position of you can't have nuclear weapons, which everyone essentially is for. There's very few people that want Iran to have a nuclear weapon in the United States. But then they went from that to, oh wait, you can't enrich any uranium. Well, that is a non-starter because that would shut down Iran's entire nuclear energy program. So yeah, Iran is enriching about 60% uranium. They would need 90 to build a bomb. And they're only doing that to kind of pose a deterrent because they don't want to develop a nuke, but they also want to make it look like, well, if we have to, we have to, without actually having a nuke, obviously. And the intelligence, despite that, still says they don't have it. So this whole thing is a propaganda ploy. Macgregor's right. We could feel enormous economic impact from this, especially in the energy markets, where Americans and the American economy is still very dependent on fossil fuels, natural gas, and oil.
Well, and probably the first target to that, I fear, could be our troops. I've mentioned several times that, all these far-flung bases, especially in Iraq and in Syria, many of them have barely even any tactical air defense, but certainly they don't have any strategic air defenses like the Iron Dome, the Patriot system, THAAD, et cetera, which we see graphically shown. Even that is very, very porous. Apparently, it's getting less than 10% in reality of the incoming ballistic missiles that Iran has been firing. And all of these bases here will be wide open. There was a specific danger, though, that I think not many people are aware of. It's not just hitting our bases, but as military summary showed this morning, there is a bigger threat to our Navy.
First of all, about the Middle East and about the possible trap. During the previous days, the United States of America were focused in deploying additional forces and troops in this area. U.S. builds up strike group of Iran, aircraft carriers, tankers, and alarm signals. Washington has sharply increased its military presence in the region amid the escalating conflict between Israel and Iran. So, of course, we see that obviously this is a part of Iranian plan to block completely the Persian Gulf. Of course, the main purpose of this blockade is not just to probably stop the international trade or something like this. The most important probably goal and task of the Iranians is the American bases in this area. According to information we have, the United States of America have lots of bases on the territory of Kuwait, Bahrain, Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and the most important, the United States of America has their Navy base on the territory of the state by the name of Bahrain. And currently there are ships, military ships of the United States of America. And obviously we understand if something happens between the United States of America and the Iranians, obviously the United States of America will have no chances for evacuation their fleet from the area of Bahrain through this Persian Gulf and then further in the direction of the Gulf of Oman and further in the direction of the Indian Sea, because obviously the fleet of the United States of America would be immediately destroyed by missile strikes carried out by the Iranians.
Do you think that Iran would actually target our fleet at Bahrain?
Yes, without hesitation. And I think President Trump knows that. But I think President Trump is betting very heavily on the promises that are being made to him by the Air Force and the Navy and Special Ops. What are those promises? Very simply, if we drop these giant bunker busters on the Iranian nuclear facility, we can destroy or disrupt that, but we can also decapitate the regime. We can drop these giant bombs on Tehran and kill lots of people at the top. This, of course, is nonsense. We should have learned this by now. I mean, as I tried to explain to several people before the Second World War really got underway with Stalin in 1941, the Germans were convinced that the Soviets had killed 35,000 of their best officers, and therefore the Soviet armed forces could not operate effectively and certainly couldn't recover from the reverses that were inflicted on it in 1941. That all turned out to be fundamentally wrong. When you start killing people at the top, you got to keep in mind that there are lots of other energetic, intelligent, ambitious people below them ready to step in. And they may turn out to be much better than the originals that you killed. Well, I think we're going to find that is true very much in Iran. The whole thing is nonsensical. We're betting that air and naval power will deliver victory. It never has. It can facilitate success, but it's not going to fundamentally change the equation on the ground. And you're not talking about little Iraq, which frankly compared with Iran is quite small, and we never did have to operate in the mountains for any length of time in the north. This is not Iraq. It's not the National Training Center that you and I know, which is a postage stamp. So you're dealing with a great power. Now, here's the other part of it. The world is rallying to Iran, not to us. We are hated and despised for supporting the genocidal regime in Israel. Well, Americans don't know that.
Yeah.
They don't particularly care. But again, the mainstream media and the government itself, along with the senior ranks of the military, they're all in the pockets of the Israel lobby.
Yeah, absolutely. And Iran is a BRICS country. It's an ally of Russia. This also jeopardizes our relationship with Russia, especially when Trump, still says that he wants to try to secure peace in Ukraine. It doesn't really seem like it from some of the policies, but this would jeopardize that to an even greater extent. Macgregor is right. They will touch whatever they can, including the U.S. fleet and U.S. soldiers at the bases, if the U.S. gets hot involved. Organizes a strike, tries to take out leadership, organizes a bombing campaign. I think you will see U.S. troops killed in the region. It's sick and twisted. I also noticed that radius of Iranian missile capabilities, it's stretched not even remotely close to the United States, because of course it doesn't. This is a war on behalf of Israel that the U.S. is being sucked into. It's not America first. It's Israel first. It's a plague to get sucked into these wars on the behest of Israel, which U.S. did at least partially under the complicity of neocons, but also at the behest of Israel when it came to Syria and Libya and Iran, by the way, and Iraq, by the way.
So they're going to preach war, war, war. And they also think we can strike with impunity. They think we can blow things up and nothing will happen to us. We're about to get an education. We have 40,000 men in these places, at least, probably more, not including contractors. We're going to get a lot of people killed. And then as far as capital ships go, today they can be tracked by satellite. It's not as though you can hide aircraft carriers anymore in the depths of the ocean. They can be found. They can be targeted. I'm sure the admirals in command of the surface fleet have been told, whatever you do, don't lose a capital ship. Don't lose a carrier. It's sort of like Winston Churchill saying to his admirals, whatever you do, don't lose the Prince of Wales. Once the hood was blown up by the Germans, the Prince of Wales beat a hasty retreat. Don't lose the Prince of Wales. Well, guess what? We're being told the same kinds of things. This is a very fragile operation. You start taking heavy losses. You start suffering economic crises on a massive scale. You watch $7 a gallon gas show up. Things in the United States will change rapidly. The frustration for me, and I think for you and many of us, is what is wrong with President Trump, who is listening to these poisonous people who have destroyed us in Ukraine, who destroyed us ultimately in the Middle East, destroyed us in Iraq. There was never any reason to occupy Iraq. We could have been out of Iraq in 90 days, 120 days, and been done with it and successful. But these poisonous voices kept us there. We're transforming Iraq. The only thing we did was transform the Middle East into a boiling cauldron of misfortune, despair, poverty, and death. We've got to stop. But President Trump doesn't seem to understand that. So he listens to these people. They're catastrophic.
Yeah, so true, man. His words sting right there, but they sting because of their accuracy and truth. Macgregor holds back no punches here, and it's true. He really is listening to a lot of poisonous voices in terms of this policy. One of the chief ones is Netanyahu, the war criminal committing a genocide in Gaza on the bankroll of the U.S. We knew that Trump was close to him. That's not too surprising. But to trust him on Iran, too? When he talked so much during his campaign about how, he's the president that avoided launching new wars, he boasted to the Libertarian Party that he wouldn't do that. He boasted to various other groups that he talked to saying that, hey, I'm not in it for this whole, mentality of nation building and exporting democracy and regime change. That's not the kind of president I am. And in some ways, that's quasi-right. In his first term, he didn't launch a new theater of war. He did exacerbate three, at least at times. The war in Yemen, he used a veto, one of his only vetoes, to extend U.S. involvement there when a bill was sent to his desk and he could have ended it completely. He expanded the intervention in Syria, and he expanded bombing in Afghanistan. He didn't launch a new war that with U.S. involvement here, it seems though he has. There's at least a support role being played. A lot of it is poisonous voices. The war criminal Netanyahu, neocons in the U.S., the Israel First crowd, the Zionist lobby, the military-industrial complex are having more pull with this administration right now than the non-interventionists like Thomas Massey and Rand Paul.
And I wonder, I'd like to drill in a little bit more on the military aspects of this and try to, I guess, help educate people about what is and isn't possible here and what the threats are that maybe we haven't faced before. When we went into, and we'll just pick the 2003 Iraq War, where Operation so-called Iraqi Freedom that Bush launched with the lie about the weapons of mass destruction and all of that. We went in there on the ground, and Iraq had already been under sanctions for 10 years after the Desert Storm, where we had decimated a lot of his military power. So he was very weak, et cetera, and had virtually no chance. Had some old scuds, and not even many of those did literally nothing to it. What is the difference between where Iraq was then and where Iran is now, if anyone thinks about doing anything, especially on the ground?
Well, the precision revolution has struck. In other words, Iran has access to the best precise missile technology you're going to find anywhere in the world. They have a virtually inexhaustible inventory of precision munitions, precision missiles, precision rockets. That didn't exist in 1990. But keep something else in mind. We were very fortunate in 1991, and very few people ever point this out. But Saddam Hussein always had the capability to launch roughly 30 to 40, maybe even 50 Scuds at once. And he could have launched all of them at one specific target, a place called Al Jabail, the port.
Remember that, yeah.
On the Persian Gulf that most of us came through.
Right.
If he had done that, that would have fundamentally changed the strategic calculus. How many people would he have killed? How much damage would he have done? In fact, we had one Scud warhead land within perhaps 500 meters of a Marine amphibious carrier full of Marines. Now, just imagine what would have happened if that thing had gotten closer and struck. In other words, we were lucky. And what did we learn from all of that? Nothing.
Yeah, less than nothing, sometimes to get embroiled in more regime change operations. And again, that is Netanyahu's goal. It always has been. The whole nuclear weapons program is a ruse to try to sell it. He's been trying to sell it on that basis for over 30 years. You can find all the examples of how he's talked about the impending threat of Iranian acquisition of nuclear weapons going back to 1992. Countless examples over and over. This drumbeat toward war with Iran. And Macgregor, again, is right. Iran poses a serious threat to troops in the region, but not America itself. So the U.S. shouldn't get involved in this war whatsoever. This is being led by Israel. The U.S. should get its troops out of the Middle East too, by the way. That's a little bit more of a fantasy, a non-interventionist fantasy that I have, but that's really the best America First solution. Why are they there in the first place? They're there to generate animosities and to take Israel's side on everything, which attracts all of their enemies to us by proxy. This is the nature of entangling alliances. It's what Jefferson and Washington and John Quincy Adams always warned about.
We have a problem. We just don't learn. And right now, we continue to forget that every time Iran fires a missile at Israel, the Israeli air defenses have to launch somewhere in the neighborhood of between 2 or even 3 missiles against the incoming missile. Well, it doesn't take a genius in mathematics to figure out that you're going to run out of missiles very, very quickly. They already are. We're shipping what we can in, but we're not running missile production in Lockheed Martin or Raytheon 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
Yeah, and by the way, the Wall Street Journal is reporting that very fact this morning, that they're running low on interceptor missiles right now.
Yeah, and this is a losing proposition. Israel started a war. It had no chance of winning and is losing. Ergo, it has to go to President Trump and say, save us, come in and save us.
That's exactly right, and it undermined what at least was ostensible U.S. foreign policy goals, and that was to negotiate with Iran for a new JCPOA. Now, Trump wasn't calling it that because he ripped up the first JCPOA, probably the best thing that the Obama administration did in the realm of foreign policy, and Obama was a disaster on foreign policy, don't get me wrong, but that normalized relations with Iran. That's why Israel hated it. It took the pretext of a war with Iran, of a regime change with Iran off the table. And that's why they're striking now. They want no possibility of a new JCPOA because then they can't sell this war. See, that's the thing. These wars can stop if the propaganda campaign dies, if it's defeated, if it's destroyed. Americans don't generally support offensive wars. They had to be dragged into them. So that's why Trump campaigned otherwise. Now they're posturing in a warlike attitude, aiding and abetting this Israeli preemptive strike that America has no business in.
And so Donald Trump is listening to all of the usual suspects on the Hill, in the Pentagon, retired and active, or in the mainstream media and say, oh, the Iranians are weak. They can't hold out. We can pulverize them. We can beat them into submission. We can drop these 30,000-pound bombs and they'll have no choice. It's not going to happen. It won't work. It didn't work during the Second War before we had precision, and we still dropped tonnage on top of easy, soft targets like Dresden or Hamburg or Berlin. Didn't make any difference. In fact, we know that in both Japan as well as in Germany, the population coalesced around its government and defended it.
Yeah, hard to disagree with anything Macgregor said. I think he was absolutely on fire in this conversation. This is not America's war. It's a losing prospect. It's a disaster for the U.S. even to be as involved as it is now. You know, this has completely turned dissidents away from Trump. It's split his base to some extent that, you know, really cared about the whole America First mentality that he preached so commonly and profusely about on the campaign trail. Now, there are a lot of Zionists that do support this, some of which do support Trump too, but this really calls into question the rest of his agenda. Can he even get it pushed through Congress now in terms of immigration or protective tariffs with this as a monkey on his back? And this is worse than a monkey on his back. This is a tiger with claws out that's going to rip at him over this. This is going to be a huge disaster. And when Trump took office, I said, like, hey, if there's one thing that I think is going to ruin his approval rating, it's starting a new war. It's either that or an economic collapse, or it's starting a new war. And it looks like that's the path he's chosen. Now, some people still say, oh, he's playing this 4D chess game and there's going to be some great deal in the end. I think that this has gone past the point of no return. There's already been missile exchanges, and Israel took a gambit hoping that the U.S. would have its back in this war, knowing that it couldn't consummate a regime change on its own. Unfortunately, that's what I think we're headed to, but we'll have to see how this plays out. I still hope that there's a chance for peace. I just don't think it's that likely at this point. But I do want to hear from you what you guys say. Let me know in the comments below. Is this past the point of no return? Is there going to be a regime change in Iran? Or will somehow a peace deal be struck? Or is the U.S. just in it full bore and overthrow the regime and maybe even have an occupational force again? I hate even saying that. Just, it's so dreadful to think about another one in the Middle East, another forever war in the war on terror, which is, you know, stretched into 30 plus years at this point. But let me know in the comments below. Like the video, subscribe to the channel, subscribe to Daniel Davis's channel too. He's awesome, does a really good job. And please consider supporting me as a YouTube member or a Patreon patron. That would help me greatly and I'd appreciate it. And until I see you guys next time, no more war, no more debt, no more inflation, and no more empire. Peace out, guys. I'll catch you in the next one.